really pleased to have here, in fact, all 4 members of the UK Public Sector Transparency Board. Tom Steinberg, Professor Nigel Sadbolt, Tim Berners-Lee. I'm not going to introduce anyone particularly. Most people here probably know who these people already are. What's going to happen is Tom's going to give a brief talk, and then we're going to do a kind of Q&A discussion on the panel. Particularly get ready with any questions you might want to ask. One thing is that Nigel and Tim have to head off. They've got a really, they're pretty amazing. They're here. We just had a press conference. They're heading down to Southampton and then back this afternoon here in London. So we're on a tight schedule, but we're going to start from here. Okay, Tom, are you ready to go?
I am, yes.
Great.
So, we live in quite extraordinary times because we live in a moment where the most important politicians in our country and in some other countries are actually actively eager to stand up and say that open data is an important priority for them and for their countries. This is politicians talking about essentially a geek issue. Even more remarkable than the fact they're standing up is the fact they're willing to change policy to deliver more open data, a commodity whose...
Is the mic on?
Okay.
It's a commodity whose impacts are, by definition, complex and unpredictable. And this is not the simple classical politics of supplying an extra hospital bed.
Is that?
Is it really?
Can we have the sound?
Yes, it's on. You need to talk into it.
Oh.
Alright. There we are. Put my place. This is not the politics of open data are about a commodity whose impacts are by definition complex and unpredictable. And it's not the simple politics of supplying an extra hospital bed or locking up another criminal. This is taking a calculated bet about a series of seemingly, at first glance, esoteric measures that we think will have big impacts driven largely by the remarkable characteristics of the internet. And this is a very, very long way from bread and circuses in terms of a thing that politicians want to stand up and talk about, but they are, and they were doing it this morning, and they will be doing it again. So we should really celebrate the fact that the political classes are paying attention to open data. And we should celebrate the fact that we're starting to get information that many of us in this room, myself included, have been clamoring for years. But we should also realise that the current situation is extraordinary. And if we don't work together to manage it quite carefully, it could crash from extraordinary to depressingly ordinary with considerable speed. And that's why the title of this talk, next 10 minutes or so, is Open Data, How Not to Cock It Up. And it's addressed to each and every one of you because you're all part of this. So what do I mean by cocking up open data? I mean making mistakes, making decisions, bad decisions, that will result in the flow of data that we think is so valuable either drying up or, in my case, never starting in the first place, because there's a whole load of things I can't get yet. And when I say mistakes, I mean mistakes that we can all make. So I've got 5. I'll run through them. The first mistake, the first way we can avoid cocking up open data is to ensure that when we advocate for it in the same way that scientists advocate for blue sky science research. We must argue it for what it is, which is a numbers game, a calculated risk that is worth taking. We must say loud and clear against the skeptics, we do not expect that the majority of government data sets contain massive wells of amazingly untapped data, just as we don't expect that most university research will yield a new penicillin or a new atomic bomb. But we do believe that it would be an incredibly stupid bet to assume that all the value that exists in all the government data sets, they're all hidden and locked away, has already been exploited. It would be like looking at the internet in 1996 and betting against the creation of Google on the grounds that, well, there's no value here that hasn't already seen. The second way we can avoid a stroll down cock-up boulevard is to cease tinkering around, to be blunt, with demos and hacks and pretty but useless visualizations, and bloody finish something useful. Now, Fix My Street that my society runs is no Facebook. I know this. I'm not worth billions of pounds. But it is a real service that makes a real difference to a significant number of people, and if you took it away, they'd be sad and they'd complain. And there are still, unfortunately, too few projects, either commercial or private based on British open data, that have this characteristic. it is a steady stream of that kind of service, commercial and not-for-profit, that will achieve the goal that we all want, which is a world in which ceasing to produce open data is just unthinkable like turning off the electricity. Third, we must go out of our way to gather information on what value is generated by people using data, even if it's just anecdotal. I've never told anybody this, but we found out that 55% of They Work For You's users tell us that they leave the site with a more favourable impression of their MP than when they arrive. That sort of anecdote, multiplied by the millions of people that use that site, is the sort of thing that will make decision makers sort of think differently about whether this is valuable or just sort of, a waste of money and destructive. Data.gov.uk could take a real simple lead here, so that after every single time you download a data set, it should blank the page completely and just say, please tell us how you're going to use this data so we can release some more in the future. Or to be more menacing and effective, that's a nice data set you've got there, be a real shame if anything untoward were to happen to it. So the process of recording and shouting about the value of public data is fundamentally in our hands, and I really mean our hands. The people in this room have such an important role. For the foreseeable future, we should adopt the approach about the government and open data of somebody who is trying to woo a rather unconvinced lover. So, what do I mean? Their friends, this lover, who represent the risk-averse public servants and the odd lobbyists, keep telling them that they should dump us because they should get on with wooing someone more worth it, someone with more prospects, China or the deficit, and that they should ignore this open data toy boy with his beautiful cheekbones, because there's nothing really there, not the real meat of international relations and the economy. So we need to keep showering them with flowers and good deeds, or by what I really mean is success stories and value, to show that we're not worth kicking out of bed. The research community has the biggest weight to carry here. Really, if you're a researcher in this field, you really must be thinking, how does my research kind of fit into this role? But also, people who run and use data, if you collect data about what your users are doing and how they get value, you have to share it, you have to shout about it, because every time you don't, every time it languishes in your Google Analytics or languishes in some internal report, you've slightly increased the chance that there won't be any data next year. Number 4, keep an eye out where public servants might be about to make terrible mistakes and stick the badge that says open data onto their terrible mistakes. And by terrible mistakes, I mean releasing data that is obviously, seriously privacy infringing, and which should never have gone anywhere near public release. And we should probably actually start thinking about helping these people by maintaining a list of top 5 data sets that it would be really, really easy to cock up the release of, and that would really harm people if you did. One really bad error, just one bad error here, will be so much bigger than all the pro-open data stories. And then people will just think that open data equals a bunch of maniacs in a room in Yulu trying to destroy other people's privacy. And finally, cock-up avoidance technique number 5, which in my mind is most important, but I will allow here is controversial, which is, I think it would be a big mistake to relentlessly tell the government right now that it should be in the business of publishing everything it can, as quick as it can and in the best formats it can. Well, this is heresy, isn't it? I mean, aren't I in favour of putting out as much open data as possible? I mean, surely that's what everybody wants. And my answer is not at the moment. In fact, right now I think it could be a rather dangerous idea. And so it might surprise you that my medium-term idea of a perfect government in relation to data is as follows. It's a government that releases no data at all until somebody asks for it. And when they do ask for it, they release it instantly, brilliantly, in 5-star, beautiful linked data the next day for free. That is my vision. But why have this very unintuitive? Why not aim high? Why not aim high? There's 2 reasons why I think it could be dangerous to aim too high at the moment and to focus too much on the big vision and not enough on the question of why don't we get that thing tomorrow. One, if we focus on asking government to publish as much as it can, it will spread the finite amount of goodwill, money, and political capital that is attached to open data very thin, possibly too thin, to the fact it doesn't achieve enough. And the change that we need most strongly right now is going to take a lot of political will. Have no mistake that when the government puts forward a green paper saying we're going to change the Freedom of Information Act to basically make it better for the people in this room, there are going to be screams. And we are all going to have to work in order to push back against those and explain why this is worth doing and why it's really, really worth the money. And secondly, actually, when it just comes to value for money, I don't personally think it is worth replacing a totally hopeless and outdated 1970s IT system with an incredibly shiny modern one if that system contains nothing that anyone wants. That to me is not actually, I'd rather take that money and put it into releasing some data that's currently 1-star and making it 5-star when people want it. So that's my 5 ways to avoid cocking up. I know there are more. I've tried to keep it short, and I'd like to move on from there to my elders and betters. Thank you very much.
One quick thing, there is space, there are some seats here, particularly if people on the edge could move inwards. It would be really appreciated on this occasion. People at the back just move up. If you could move inwards rather than just sit on the end seat, that would be really appreciated. Come forward from the back. Come forward. Okay. Do either of you want to say anything quickly for 1 or 2 minutes before we have questions? Or do you want us to go straight into having some questions from the audience? Do you have something you really want to tell the Open Government Data? Okay, Tim, go for it.
All right, I've got 60 seconds before we start with questions. One, keep up the good work. This is incredible. And it's great, it's just great to see this room full of energy with more people who are actually making stuff happen. It's hacking what puts the data on the web, and it's hacking what uses it, and keep up hacking this the data in both directions. I could spend a long time responding to these 5 questions, and yeah, you're right. The last one, I'm not sure we can see completely eye to eye on, because I think that sometimes to start with, I would, you say, oh, you don't want to waste all the money and social capital on taking out a system, putting in a shining system. And one of the things we've learned is, don't change the way you operate. The way we should put in this linked open data is we should put it in with a shim layer, which an adapter. So leave things running. Don't disturb people. Don't disturb the people who have built their lives around and their careers around producing the system which produces the data and which now manage it, and we're expecting to retire and will retire on managing that system. Do not ruffle their feathers. Do not threaten them. Just show how you can make the work that they're doing more visible, more appreciated, and show how you can give them more kudos by running a little server on the side of their box, which every night strips up what's on their box through the simplest means possible, runs a little conversion and moves into the space. Or maybe if they have a chance, just get them to modify their pipeline so that where they did store their data in a protected space, you get them to use the same pipeline but store it in an unprotected space, which actually is probably cheaper because it costs money to protect the space. So the areas in which you can really manage effectively, zero cost, or the cost is actually people working a bit late and in the evening a couple of times, but the main thing is the change of mindset. It's the change of mindset that is really important. That if it's sort of thing that you would I prefer the model where you imagine that it's a model just like Ruth's is where you Tom, it's like where you Rufus Tom, where you imagine that where you don't do anything until the FOIA request comes along, and then you do it brilliantly, immediately, and for free, and put it all up as 5-star data, except that the FOIA request is hypothetical and in your head. You imagine, supposing someone were to ask for this. Oh, well, so that rather than prepare myself for an instant action, and I will actually just make it as 5-star data anyway, because that's what everybody's doing now, that's cool, and I will be able to show my mum and my kids, look, that's my 5-star data there, your dad did that. So that it's a change of culture. So great to see that you're doing such good things. Great to see software. Great to see stickers too. So even though I am running a bit out of space on here, I'm afraid. Well, I've got 2 of these open data boxes, so I can include that. The Creative Commons says Creative Commons about 6 times. So I will let's give a bit of occlusion there. Proud sticker. So, yeah, keep up the good work. Remember that this is, as I just said, just around the corner. Remember, you're working on UK stuff. Keep doing that. Remember, you're doing it in international context. You're working on government data. Keep doing that. But remember, also there are people working on scientific data, weather data, all kinds of other things which will connect. That's what exciting. So do spend a bit of it, 10% of your time to think about the other communities, larger and smaller, which you're going to connect with, so that that thinking can make the whole world into a connected space. The connection is the sort of thing which I'm really keen on.
I was just saying, one of the great things is that we do have people from about 30 different countries here today, at the event. So I think one of the biggest things is to learn from each other and to build this bigger community towards not just linked data in a technical sense, but also linked socially.
Yeah, okay, quick plug. And we're putting together new W3C working groups on e-government, which will include linked open government data. Working group, tell us, we're charting them now. Tell us what you need to see in the charter, tell us what you think W3C groups need to do.
Can I say one thing? Because I get to say it to you. So it's about linked data, which is, please, I think it's amazing, but please can we have some Debian packages, some basic packages for the actual stores. It's very difficult at the moment to sell RDS stores to people. So that's why one thing is, show that group, give a massive prize someone in this room if they build, and it's maybe a bit technical here, but build a package for a decent open source data store.
Hands up. Who prefer a Debian package?
Or Ubuntu package.
Who prefer Mac DMG? Who prefer Windows? Nobody.
So the challenge has gone out.
Okay.
Actually, Tom makes some really important observations, I think, which we would do well to reflect on. I mean, that last one is a great point. As those of us who are into developer mode or researcher mode, it is incumbent on us to tool up the environment so that we can all do a better job on this. And there is just a lot to do on that front. A couple of observations. I do think that it's really important that there is a finite amount of political will, there always is. We've had a good chunk of it re-expressed again today. But I think it is important we cling to some basic principles, and where we can kind of instill the public data principle, we've got to keep people's feet held to the fire. So where there are already commitments to releasing data, and it isn't turning up as regularly as it should, we should be saying, well, where is it? Because that will inculcate the process of actually, we said it, we should keep our side of the bargain. I just don't know on this issue about opening everything up, because actually we know from the first web that it was the unanticipated reuse. Now, we would love to know how to identify the data set that was going to have the highest value and derive the most applications. And in fact, I think we've got a sense of where some of them are, but some of the kind of data in dusty corners or the neglected spreadsheet can be a belter, as we've seen. So I think we've got an interesting tension here, and I'm sure we'll hear it re-expressed around we all want to move this thing on as practically and as pragmatically as possible. And the other great thing about a group like this is we're all trying to race to the top, but also learn and share and collaborate together, and that's a great thing.
Fantastic. Okay, I'm going to go to take questions like two at a time. I don't think at the moment we have a roving mic, so you're going to have to shout quite loudly, relatively. Who has a question? Does anyone have a question? This lady here. Stand up, say your name, and tell us what you want to know.
Barbara Buckley-O in Loughborough University. I come from a library background, so I'm thinking of it from the user's perspective. All this data is for the public out there. What do we need to do to try and empower the citizen with the skills they need to understand the information, to interpret it, to be able to articulate their own information needs, so they can then feed back to you what they need?
Okay, and I'll take one other question before we answer. This gentleman here at the front, go for it.
I'm Adrian Norman. I'd like to ask when, after 10 years, we're going to implement the Article 9 of the Public Sector Information Directive. We agreed 7 years ago to something we'd researched for 3 or 4 years. and a directive was issued by the Commission to all member states. And in Article 9, it said, make some practical arrangements for getting the information out. Where are those practical arrangements? One of them must be to release the information asset register records of everybody. But the Information Commissioner 2 years ago instructed all local authorities.
What's your question? I'm going to be tough when you hear. What's your question?
My question is, when are we going to do it?
Right.
Because
I don't, can
we
we?
have agreed to do it.
Never.
And we can meet to our commitments.
So this is a question, when do you think we should do it, or when, because our capacity even here to say when it will happen is more limited. That was the minister. But okay, the question is, so information asset registers particularly, when should and when will they get released?
When should, that's already...
Right, but when do we, okay.
And when are we going to take it up with the holders of the information to obey the law?
Okay, got it. So two questions, I think one over here which was maybe I think about intermediaries versus citizens getting direct access to data, how will it happen? I think it's a really interesting question. Is this vision of some amazingly data literate citizenry, or is it a vision of intermediate people who are sophisticatedly present it? And the other question is, information asset registers and generally the PSI directive. Tom, you seem to have something on the never front, or was that enough? Was that all that was to be said?
I think that EU-based regulations that are nearly a decade old are not going to get much traction with an essentially conservative government in a time of austerity. I think that even if it's the right thing to happen, and even if we're going to see more open data, I don't see us getting open data through a mechanism that fundamentally failed. It sort of it stinks of failure. So I think it's probably time to look forward to how we change things next.
I would just say on the asset, it is pretty important for effective rights to data and FOI that we actually know what data is held. So I think we've got to think about how we make something work that actually gives us a sense of what is held, and or how do we know what we have a right to. And the other point on intermediaries, I actually think that, yeah, we do need these tools. It hasn't got to be just for the high-end developers and data entrepreneurs. All I would say is that there's a bigger piece on this, and it is about data literacy. It's about trying to get some of the woeful lack of effective instruction in this area in our school system up to date. That we don't have the means and the wherewithal with efficient curricula to reflect what is happening in the world, and that's as true actually in some of our university systems.
Yeah, when will school, I mean, at least in the UK, when will they teach you to code again? I mean, when I last went, you learned how to use PowerPoint. You didn't learn how to code.
Absolutely. So I think obviously there will be levels of answer to that question, not in answer to, but elaborating. Yes, it is a huge question. Yes, I think it is important to have better tools and to teach people. I would love it if kids learned that a computer is not like a refrigerator, but it's something which can do anything you can imagine, like it used to be when I was a kid, and probably is for people in this room. I have to throw that down the gauntlet to them as programmers, but obviously you don't want to have only the people who are prepared to program and capable of programming as being the people who actually understand how the country runs. So the intermediaries are really important. Earlier, I pushed it out to the press and said, look, if you're a journalist, not press in the sense of paper and trees, but press in the sense of the journalism profession has got, I think, a responsibility to be an intermediary, to explain this stuff, and this means that journalists have to be data savvy. They have to do that. Teachers have to. Librarians, when it comes to certainly finding stuff, they have a traditional role. So yes, librarians now have to be able to help people find the data sets and figure out which data sets are actually going to be valuable for some kid's project. I think I can imagine tools which are a whole lot better than the ones we've got. If I had spare time in the breaks on planes, I code them up in JavaScript, but and I haven't got round to actually organising a team of sort of 16 programmers to do it, but I can imagine ways in which could be very, very much better. But then, and I know that I make them, they may be wonderful, but they will be slow if you feed them too much data. So then I think there's a huge amount of development to do, in a sense of first building really nice tools for people to use to allow them to very intuitively find their way through the different data sets as they are linked together, and then turn those tools into things which will work at scale when there's masses and masses of data out there. So there's masses of development and research to do in how we manage these vast bodies of interconnected data.
Okay, so I'm going to take two, because Nigel and Tim have to zoom off, I'm going to take two final questions and that will be it. I ask, so anyone has got a question, and then keep it short. So one gentleman at the back, stand up, say us your name if you don't mind, and speak really loudly.
Okay, I'm Stefan, I'm from the internet, and I'm interested...
You're from where, sorry?
From the internet.
From the internet?
You or I may manifest.
You or my father or grandfather or whatever. So my question is how to get that on a European level there. I know about the PSI directive is being consulted by the Commission until the end of the month. Does it make sense to give some input there to enhance the PSI directive in regards of open government data, for example? Also on the European level, and push it down via directives to the member states. Thank you.
Or what's the alternative, do you think, in your mind? Just lobbying in your country, or just going and doing stuff with data? Okay. And one other question, Karen.
It's kind of building on that. We've got this big dilemma in aid, which is a tiny proportion of government budgets in the north, and we're trying to map it against the whole of the budget of the recipient country in the south. And we've got this huge, this is really how do we do this better? We have standards forming tentatively at international level. That should happen in February. But what do we do next? Do we push this to a country level through legislation? This is mainly public spend. Do we try and build working models at country level, which is what we're doing. We're trying to do with Where Does My Money Go with a youth set of old, dead Uganda. What are the techniques we need to drive this forward? Because our user community are incredibly spread out, and that we're never going to physically get them in the same places, and the people that can understand the data are a hell of a long way away from the people that can program. So help, I think, is the answer. What should we be doing next?
Okay, I'm going to be brutal here, and I'm going to kind of rewrite those questions a little bit. So question one, I'm going to rewrite into basically, should we be spending time, because it's actually really, the thing is it's really boring compared to writing code, going off and writing things to the commission, or like lobbying, or leveling, but being an activist in that sense. Or should we be writing code and doing cool stuff today, or just scraping data, just going, data's out there, they haven't opened it up, but we're just going to grab it and do stuff? Or should we be spending our energy, which is really important, but it's kind of sometimes a bit soul-destroying, on the political system? Number two question, I think, was also, I'm going to rewrite it slightly to, one, should you try and establish a standard? Because I think that's the point. If you're trying to map data from, let's say, aid given from the UK to Uganda against their budget, a big problem is the identifier problem, right? Which we talked about a lot. And identifiers are related to standards. People agreeing to use the same identifiers. But it's bloody hard because it means people agreeing. So my question often is, should we just zoom ahead with basically, community-built standards, rough consensus and running code, or should we be seeking to kind of go, no, we want an ISO standard for kind of, I don't know, entity names or for UN classification for spending types? That's how I'm going to rewrite those two questions. Community-driven standards, or from a,
So that has been from the beginning of the web, and perhaps way back longer, that question, should we go between the monolithic global thing and a completely and a massive non-communicating individuals, that has been a constant question. People have said, where should we go? Where should we spend our effort? So my conclusion, given that there are about 10 to 11 people on the planet, so there's a scale of 10 to 11 down to 1, to 10, or the scales of 10. Go and buy the books, Powers of 10, which has got all those pictures, help you understand sort of that what's interesting about the world is there is detail at each level. So my view of what will happen when a piece of RDF information is passed in the future, in 10 years' time, when I look at a piece of this data, it will have lots of namespaces in it. 10% of its vocabulary, only 10% of the data you're dealing with will be according to an international standard. Maybe there'll be boring things but important things like start date time, end date time, latitude, longitude, WGS 84. Those things where people have already gone out and spent the effort to get. So then, WGS84 works the same in Uganda as here. My GPS will work, and my phone and my calendar will work the same in Uganda as here. 10% of it is international, 10% of it is maybe at the European level, 10% of it is at the national level, 10% of it is at the Greater London level, and so on. And 10% of the data in that piece of in that file I'm using is an ontology which my computer produced right now because it's actually part of a rule set that I'm generating just for this particular view on this particular thing I'm doing today. And so it turns out that when you look, when web scientists look at the web, they find that you have structure at all these levels. So my hypothesis is that is actually optimal. Okay, so that is the answer. Spend a certain amount of your time at the international level. We should collectively, this group of people should spend 10% of its time thinking at the international level, working on international standards, but only 10% of its time at that level. And between you will end up producing standards at all these levels. You will pick your battles. You will only work on things at the high levels where it's a total pain, because you have to meet with so many people of different, with different cultures. But you will pick your battles, and you will end up distributing your energy. But when you put this system together, this sort of fractal, scale-free system together with structure at all of the different levels, nicely balanced, you end up with this beautiful sweet spot, which is a totally connected, entangled, wonderful, linked humanity, which will actually work a whole lot better, and is perhaps the only way we can actually save ourselves.
And that's great answer. And on the other... on the other question, actually the answer is top down, middle out, bottom up, of course. But in a similar way, the EU is getting interested. So Jonathan Gray actually and I were at a meeting in Luxembourg where they're talking and now think about this data.gov.eu and the portal of portals, but a lot of countries are looking at this now. And they've got a lot of models. I mean, so some people are driven by a bunch of activists who can't believe their country isn't doing it. There are countries that are sitting there thinking, if only we had a certain legislative process, it would make it easier, and other people are just going to get on and do it. So I think we will see, and a lot of this is driven by the fact that people are looking over their shoulders and seeing what's happening in those countries who are embracing it, those cities, those regions, and saying, why aren't we in this space? What is it? It's just so hard to argue against the premise of much of this work.
Tom?
And a very simple answer to the question over there. The answer to Karen's question is, I don't know, it sounds really hard. The answer about how to split your time, well, I sort of live a manifestation of this split. I work essentially about a 6-day week, poor me. 5 days of that is on my society, which is really cool and interesting, and 1 day is giving the government advice for no money. And it's less fun, it's less interesting, but fundamentally this morning I heard part of Francis Maude's talk this morning, and he reaffirmed the government's commitment to publishing contracts starting next year, and that's Julian Todd's idea, a Liverpudlian anarchist who told the idea to me. I turned it into their policy, and now it's been announced. And if I had not spent that 1 day a week because it wasn't fun and it was boring and difficult and time-consuming and rubbish and less interesting than web design fundamentally, we wouldn't have the possibility of government contracts coming out next year. So 5 and 1 as the mix of your cocktails is my answer.
Okay, well, it's fitting we end with Tom and started it, and I think it's amazing, and well, Julian here should be blushing, and I think is a legend. Okay, everyone, Tim and Nigel have to dash off. Thank you all, and we're going to go into the next sessions, but thank you all for this, and I hope you've enjoyed it.